Welcome to Gift of Life, the Organ Transplant podcast. These are the stories of those who have received, given, and who are waiting for the gift of life, organ transplantation. Now here's your host and heart and kidney recipient, BJ Odom.
Welcome to the Gift of Life, the Organ Transplant podcast, where we explore the extraordinary world of organ transplantation. I'm your host, BJ Odom. Each week we share inspiring stories and introduce you to remarkable individuals sharing their own transplant stories. Be sure to support the podcast by leaving a 5-star review and subscribing on your preferred podcast platform. And if you have a transplant story you'd like to share, just give us an email, giftoflifepodcast@gmail.com. That's giftoflifepodcast@gmail.com. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, and we have a brand new website we're working on. It's kind of like not a whole lot of stuff there now, but you can go to giftoflifepodcast.com and check it out. Welcome to episode 56. Caregivers are one of the most important parts of a transplant recipient. And of course, we talked to George, who is Terri's caregiver, who we had on the podcast last week. This week, we talked to George, who has started TCH Caregivers Heart, a caregiver support group. It started for caregivers for heart recipients, but soon turned into, something bigger and even more exciting. All transplant recipient caregivers. And today, it's so popular that they are meeting online monthly, and you can become part of that group. Today, George is ready to tell us all about it, and that is coming up next. You may remember Terri from last week. Well, this week we're talking to her husband, George, who has been her caregiver and doing an amazing job, I hear. But most importantly, I'm kind of excited because you're doing a lot of work with caregivers, right?
Yeah, that's right. And first of all, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I don't know, it's a tough show to follow being on after Terri, but hopefully I'll try to hold my own. Yeah, the caregiver thing has become just such a real focus for me. My number one priority always was and will always continue to be Terri and taking care of her. But my role as a caregiver has kind of grown over the years, and it's evolved into a desire to share the experience and to create a community where people who are dealing with being caregiver for solid organ transplant recipients have a safe place to go and express themselves. And so there's a whole evolution and a story behind all of that. But we're currently operating a group called TCH Caregivers Heart. And it is a group, peer-led support group online, open to any organ recipient from any transplant center. We literally have some people from other countries, so we're international from that perspective. And we meet online twice a month, and we talk about everything to do with the transplant community, the transplant experience, and the caregiving side of that, which is a thing each in and of itself. The journeys are very much parallel, the transplant recipient journey and the caregiver journey, but they are definitely some unique things with the caregivers that they need a space to talk about and to have a community with people who are going through similar experiences. So that's kind of what TCH Caregivers Heart is all about.
And I know, your number one priority was to help Terri get through her heart transplant, which can be a chore. But when did it hit you, or when did you say, you know what, there really needs to be a group that helps us caretakers? And when did that form in your mind? Like this podcast, I saw Christine Applegate is doing a podcast on MS. And I says, man, why aren't I doing one about heart transplants? So when did this come into your mind to do this?
Well, that's a great question. So, shortly after Terri's transplant, so she was transplanted in November of 2022, and she was, people remember from last week, the first heart transplant recipient at the Christ Hospital, the transplant center where she received her gift of life. And that was, sort of a a big thing, being the first. There was a lot about that. And so we had social workers and transplant coordinators and doctors and everybody who spent a lot of time with Terri and I in the very short time between when she was admitted and she thankfully got the heart. And one of the social workers mentioned to me about the need for caregiver support. And I said, yeah, I'm going to be fine. No worries. I got this. And the doctor said to me every time, take care of yourself. You have to take care of Terri. All of those things. And so that sort of was probably daily drilled into my head by the team. And at the time I was probably, the typical guy that said, look, I got this. We've been married for 46 years. I've been taking care of her for a long time. No problems. I've got this. Well, I quickly realized that was pretty dumb and that I needed to maybe listen to them. And so I took note of a caregivers group that was available for transplant recipients, all organ transplant recipients. And I've come to find out that there are very few of them, but there's a great one out of Gift of Life, Howie's house in Philadelphia. And I got the information for that and I tucked it away. And after we got through sort of the initial recovery period, which is very intense, the first literally few months, maybe 3 months, I decided that I really needed to start working on some of that self-care that the team had been so adamant about when we were back in the hospital. And so I made contact with this group and I registered for the group and I joined the first session online. And, I kind of just listened and I heard all of the other people talking. And as I'm listening, I'm hearing them bring up topics that all had crossed my mind and things that in my own mind I had been struggling with or been questioning or wondered if I was alone feeling this way and maybe I shouldn't feel this way, because there are things that are coming up and it's a stressful situation. And so I started to listen and I remember the first couple of times I got on and I came out and Terri would ask me, well, what'd you think? And I was like, man, I don't know. There's some stuff here I'm not sure I really wanted to hear, but I kind of stuck with it. And very, very quickly, I realized that it was really something that I needed. And I thought, this is really beneficial. I'm getting a lot out of it. At first, I thought, well, I wish I had a group that was just heart transplant related and not all of the other organs. And again, soon came to realize that it really didn't matter what the organ was. The experience that the caregiver was going through, aside from some different nuances medically for some of the things that they're dealing with, the experiences that they go through and their emotions and their feelings were universal. If you were a caregiver for an organ transplant recipient, you were worried about how to manage medication. You were worried about keeping your loved ones safe. You were worried about, can I travel or not? Then you started to worry about some of those practical things, but also about, why am I feeling so alone? Why am I feeling so isolated? There were all those themes that kept coming up in that group. And I thought, it doesn't really matter whether they're a heart recipient or any other organ. So I thought, I would really like to see if I could do something to bring that type of service to the growing heart transplant community at Christ Hospital where Terri had her transplant. And again, she was the first. And by that time, they had done a few more. But I know that their plan had been and their expectation was, and they far exceeded that actually in the 2.5 years, but their expectation was that the program would grow because they felt there was definitely the need. And so I started communicating with the director of transplant and with the doctor, the director of the medical transplant program and others there at the Christ Hospital and expressing that I'd really like to do this. And they were very supportive, saying that they knew and understood that was an important part of the recipient's journey to have a good caregiver. And so I just kind of started talking to them about, how do we do this? How do we go about it? And my ultimate goal, or my initial goal, was to have, the hospital help me kind of get this thing up and running, and maybe even let me be sort of a second to somebody there, one of the social workers who would run the program. Well, we kind of started running through some red tape issues because I'm not an employee and there's legal issues and all that. And I pretty much said, look, I'll run it. I'm fine with it. I can do it myself. I just need some support. I really needed them to do the outreach to the patient community because I didn't really have access because of HIPAA to who the transplant patients were and therefore who the caregivers were. So they helped me kick it off. We got it started last July, and they did some outreach through email and a couple of other things. And we put some posters together that we put up in the clinic. And there was a pretty good surge of interest initially with the folks there. And we started to get some people registering for it. I had to learn how to put together a Google form and, all the stuff to get the registrations working. But we got it all up and running, and we started to get some registrations, and we started to have some of our meetings. And just as I had hoped, there were people there that felt like they really needed it. So we started those meetings. We had them again twice a month, and we carried on for several months. As we approached the holidays, things started to wane a little bit. The membership really hadn't grown a lot because the community wasn't that big. And I kind of started to get antsy. I became so focused on making sure that this group was available to the recipients. I paced the floor at night and tried to figure out how can I do this? How can I make it more? And I'm so lucky to have Terri because she was so supportive and such a great partner to bounce ideas off of. And we finally came up with, look, maybe we need to move a little bit beyond. The hospital had been wonderful. They'd done everything they can to help me get it launched. But maybe we needed to move out into a broader audience. So I decided just a couple of months ago, actually, to sort of open it up to all transplant recipients or all transplant organ recipients, caregivers, and then to any caregivers across the country so that we could try to make this service available to more people.
Now, let me ask you this then. What do you think is the hardest part of being a caregiver that you've found? And obviously, as you have your meetings, seems to be the biggest problem for other, caregivers.
Sure. Yeah, that's a really good question. There are a lot of things, but I think some of the themes are recurring that we run into. And many of them involve isolation, feeling that I'm the only one that really understands what we're going through as caregivers and as the patient is going through as well. And there is also a kind of a recurring theme of resentment where the caregiver kind of expresses that this wasn't my plan, and I know it's not my loved one's fault for needing an organ transplant, but it's kind of, impacted my life and changed my life. And I know it's hard probably for some to admit, but they feel a feeling of resentment, not so much against their person as a person, but just against the situation. And, kind of that doubt that they have in their minds as to whether or not they can carry it on. So those three things seem to be the themes that recur the most often.
How do you handle that, or what could you suggest to someone who maybe has those feelings?
First of all, I'm very fortunate that I have a person I caregive for who is compliant, who is gracious, who is looking to move it forward and pay it forward for the gift that she's gotten, and who walks right beside me in my advocacy for organ, eye, and tissue donation and for the caregiver group. And I understand and realize that I'm very fortunate in my situation, but others maybe not so much. So what comes out of the group, and I don't necessarily suggest things because that's not necessarily my role as a facilitator. I try to guide the discussion and get people to talk. And what seems to come out that people say to address those things, first of all, is don't be ashamed and seek counseling for yourself. That's a very important thing for caregivers. Most of the caregivers I know and I connect with have either currently are or have in the past had some sort of professional counseling to deal with the stress, to deal with the emotions, And I wholeheartedly endorse that and try to guide people and direct them in that direction to address those things, because the resentment, the isolation, the fear, all of those things can be addressed in those sessions. Outside of professional help, I really encourage them to join a caregiver community. Join a community of people who are going through the same thing. I often say the first step in self-care is joining a support community. And I really, truly believe that that's the case, whether it's my community or one that you find locally or one that you are on Facebook. On Facebook, you can join many groups that are out there. I have one as well. And if you don't feel comfortable being on camera on a Zoom call or whatever, you can just listen, or you can vent anonymously or whatever. And you need that outlet. And so I encourage people that are feeling those things to do those two things: seek professional help and get involved in a support community.
I'm glad you say resentment a little bit, because this is I don't know, it's my personality to talk. I mean, it's just my personality. But she will have she went through breast cancer. And to me, that was harder than anything I went through, watching her go through it.
Being there and watching them go through that for someone that you care about, it's hard. That and the emotions that you feel there are sadness and I think that resentment, and again, not resentment toward them, but maybe resentment toward the situation. But I keep referring to how lucky I am with Terri, but she helped me through that. She said, look, these are not the things that we hoped or that we planned for, but it's the cards we've been dealt. So let's do our best and stay positive. And her positive attitude and her approach has helped me. But I also have come to realize that many of the other caregivers that I deal with, unfortunately, don't have that support from their person. So, but yeah, seeing them go through that is tough. And I can understand where you say it was harder on you, that you felt both transplants were, is to watch her have to go through that. Yeah.
And it's really funny too, because when we were like, if she's getting a treatment or, she's getting a surgery or anything like that, I'm the first one to be sitting there on the other side of the bed as the nurses come in, and I need to quit doing it, because I can tell it's probably some of that resentment and some of the things that upsets her. But I go, I don't like this. I go, I'm on the wrong side of the bed. I'm not supposed to be here. I'm supposed to be where she is. And then she goes, this is my time. But because even when she has a doctor's appointment, sometimes I'll start, she'll be talking about what's going on, and I'll mention, I had a heart transplant and a kidney transplant. When we walk out, she goes, that was my time. She goes, I'm supposed to be, I'm the patient when I go in there. And so, and I never really thought about it until you started talking about the resentment and things like that. And I think maybe that's what she's trying to tell me. That's my time. You just be quiet, sit there and be my caregiver.
This is about me.
I think.
And I have such a hard time with that, because I tend to, it's really interesting, the dynamic that happens, with the medical staff and all the people that we deal with. We as the caregivers start talking about our transplant and our journey and because we were right there alongside with them. And so they'll start asking Terri questions about, how she's been feeling or this and I answer, and I'm like, I got to shut up. This is about her, not about me. But I'm talking about her, but still I got to learn not to get too deep into that and let her handle things herself. But that's another thing that I think sometimes caregivers, can lose their identity a bit, because it becomes one. You're one with the transplant, and I do hear that come up sometimes in our group sessions as well, where the people feel like, my identity's gone. I am just the transplant person's spouse or mother or parent or whatever role they have in their lives. And that, again, is kind of that isolation and that loss of identity that sometimes the caregivers have. So, we just try to talk about those things, and it's amazing, because somebody will bring up a question, And you can sit there, on a Zoom screen and you got 15 or 16 people, whatever, and you can just see everybody nodding their head, because when somebody brings up a theme, it almost universally hits everybody, and they all want to talk about it. And it's a great thing from my standpoint to be the facilitator. I have a topic ready every month, twice a month when we meet, because I always don't want there to be any, dead air time. You understand that. And so I have a topic, but I never get to it, because once we do the introductions and we get started, the conversation just becomes organic and the people talk. And that's the beautiful thing. I just want to be able to sit back and help keep them on track and help them guide and just provide that space for them to do that.
Awesome. But, another problem, see, here I am talking about my problems, and we're talking about caregivers here. Shouldn't be talking about my problems. But my wife is one of those people too. Like, she is like, if I'm feeling bad or something's bothering me, she'll say, you need to call, Tampa. That's where I got my transplant. You need to call Tampa. Right. You need to find out what's going on. And then whenever anything is wrong with her, and I say, you need to call your doctor, she goes, I'll take care of it when I want. I go, oh, but you keep telling me I'm supposed to call. Well, I'm supposed to be watching over you too.
I'm right.
But yeah.
And I've had a couple of experiences with a role reversal. I had to have a surgery after Terri had the transplant. And it was, my recovery was a few days, nothing like hers. But she did a great job of reversing the role. But yeah, I found it hard not to make mention of the fact when the doctors came in that, see, now I'm on the other side, and they were like, yeah, we know. It's still all about Terri when you guys come here. But now the hospital's been great about all of that, and they include both of us in all the opportunities we have to share. And Terri and I try to do a lot of organ donation advocacy there at the Christ Hospital, along with other places as well. But I always say they're always going to have a place in our heart, so to speak, and it's important whenever they're doing something that we get the chance to be involved in that, and they're very good about allowing us to do that.
Now, one thing I'd like for you to do too, because there are many caregivers out there, obviously. Why don't you give a little plug? Like, let's say, when are your meetings and how can they get in contact so they can be, part of the group?
Great. Well, I appreciate that. Yeah. So we meet online 2 times every month. We meet on the 2nd and 4th Wednesday of every month. Our sessions start at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And they can get involved by just checking out our website. It is tchcaregiversheart.com, tchcaregiversheart.com. And on the website, you'll see a little video of Terri's story. You'll see some pictures and then an explanation of what TCH Caregivers Heart is all about. Most importantly, it'll give you the opportunity to register for the group. And then also you can connect to social media groups on there as well. And I would encourage everybody to connect to the social media group, because I see that as yet another area of collaboration, another community that's available. And, it's really been rewarding. I bought the domain and launched the website just a couple of months ago. And at the time I had, like I said, about a dozen people from only the Christ Hospital community that were part of my group. And once I launched it and just began talking about it a little bit on social media, the group today stands at 46 members. It's grown, exponentially in just the last couple of months, and we're growing every day. I've got one member that joins the group from Tanzania. I have one from Melbourne, Australia, a couple from Canada, and then several from places all over the country: Colorado, California, Utah, Pennsylvania, Kentucky, Indiana, all around. And all that tells me is that there's a need for this. And as the word gets out and people who are in this community become aware, I fully expect that this, will be something that we'll be able to continue. And my goal for this is, I want to continue to run it and facilitate it and be part of it as long as I can. But in long term, I want to build something here that can be sustainable and something that, somebody else can take over someday, and that service and that ability for the caregivers to create a community where they can feel safe and comfortable, carries on. And so that's kind of what my goal is in terms of that. Again, tchcaregiversheart.com. They should be able to find everything they need to become part of the community right there.
Sounds like an awesome thing to do, and an awesome program too. And it's just, that's something you just thought of, but something very well needed. And, like I said, I don't think there's a whole lot of this out there.
Yeah, it's been really gratifying as I've made some contacts with various groups that are part of the transplant community. And as I've, started to talk about this, I've got several groups already. I'm going to a meeting tonight of one of the local groups who are, kidney advocates. It's a group called Off the List, who try to help people get off the list that can become, they're looking for living donors for kidney recipients. And, kidney recipients make up a huge percentage of those waiting for transplant at this point. But all of those organizations and these people that are in this community, when I talk to them about what we're doing here, are like, oh my gosh, this is something that is really needed. And we've been wanting to include some support for caregivers for such a long time. And it just seems to have found a niche. And I think one of the unique things is that it's peer-led. So that's different than some of the social worker-led groups that are out there. It's peer-led. It's caregivers only. And, I made the decision early on that even though there are a lot of groups that have caregivers and recipients together, I didn't want to have recipients in the group, because I truly believe that the caregivers wouldn't really talk about everything that they need to talk about if the recipient is sitting right there. There are parts of this journey that are unique that the caregiver or that the recipient may not be able to relate to, and the caregiver needs that unique space. So it's online, so anybody can join. It's peer-led, and it's recipient only. And I think those three sort of unique factors is what's appealing to people as they get the word out. So I'm grateful for opportunities like this, and I'm grateful for your support to try to get the word out, because I think that'll do the trick. I think if the word gets out there, there's definitely a need for it. And so I'm just looking to keep it going.
Well, I've been doing this podcast now for just a little over a year. And as soon as you made contact with me and told me what you were doing, I said, oh my gosh, this is something important. And this is something that we need to get out there. And because it's been a year, we've done a podcast every week, haven't skipped a week. And
right.
This is something that, we've touched on a little bit. We've talked to some caregivers. And, I had my wife on one time as a caregiver and how important they are. But I've never had like a caregivers. And there, I think a lot of a lot of areas have support groups for the recipients. And a lot of the caregivers go to those meetings, but there's not one specific, and I like the idea. I mean, yes, because I know, I'd be talking in there going, but dear. So what you're saying is correct. Where it's for the caregivers only, where they can spout their sad times, their happy times, their times, like you say, when they're angry, because you go through all those emotions. And I think, I ask a lot of people, and I'll ask you, okay, because you were the caregiver. When you found out your wife needed a heart transplant, how did you feel?
Well, again, we had been in the cardiomyopathy journey for about 17 or 18 years. So intellectually, we knew in the back of our minds that was likely where we were heading. At the same time, when it hit, it was like a ton of bricks. It was like, oh my God, that's crazy. We have always been really good problem solvers. And again, I keep reiterating how fortunate we are. We've been good problem solvers as a team. And after the initial, shock of it and those emotions, which, we cried and we talked and we worked through those, we right away went into problem solving mode. Okay, what do we need to do? What do we need to get set up? Where do we need to go? And we did it as a team. And I'm just so fortunate that Terri and I have that kind of relationship. And so my emotions were there, and they were deep, but they were shared. And I think anytime you can share your emotions with somebody that you care about, it helps. And so I didn't feel alone, and I didn't feel isolated. And I hope that that's how she felt as well. And, we worked through them, and we had a talk one morning as we were awaiting the transplant. We sat down in the morning and having a cup of coffee after breakfast, and Terri looked at me and said, look, I want to talk about something serious. And I said, okay. And she basically proceeded to tell me, if this doesn't go right, here's what I want for you. Here's my vision for your life after I'm gone. And we cried, and we held each other, and we talked through it, and we made the plan. And then we said, okay, we're good. We've got the plan in place. Everything's great. We got it organized. Let's go. And her attitude was kind of like, I'm giving it up at this point, and wish we weren't here, but whatever's going to happen is going to happen, and we really can't control that. Let's focus on what we can control. And that gave me strength, and that kind of took care of those emotions that I might have been afraid of. And going into the transplant, we were calm. Hard as that is to believe, as big a traumatic experience that it is, and being the first and all the rest, we were calm. And I think that's carried us through. I think that's the way we approach everything that's happened and everything that I'm sure we will end up having to face. And I think that's what puts us kind of in a unique position to be able to, and we feel very blessed to be able to advocate and to do the things that we're doing, and to give back. And, a lot of people are saying, and I certainly appreciate, how great the caregiver group is and how needed it is. And I agree, and I appreciate everybody's, saying great things about it. But in all honesty, it does a lot for me. It helps me too. This is therapy for me to be able to do this. I need this focus, and I need the ability to be able to do that. And so I'm very grateful. And as Terri likes to say, I'm the caregiver for the caregivers.
I know you don't want another project because you're working on a lot of stuff, but this would make for because I'm in the process right now of writing my memoir with a ghostwriter, and this would be an awesome book to have out there on the shelves to help for caregivers.
Well, it really would, and that thought's crossed my mind. But and as I get this thing up and running, like I said, it's not that difficult to manage once it's up and going. And I'm working with some organizations who are going to help me kind of maybe help boost this and help with some of the infrastructure things that you have to do to make this happen. And that's not a bad idea. You'll have to hook me up with your ghostwriter.
Okay. Now, another quick question I have for you,
Sure.
Because I remember this. I remember I was in the hospital. My wife was probably 2 hours away from the hospital. And I got in the middle of the night, they came in and said, "We found you a heart. We're probably going to have you, in the operating room sometime tomorrow. You need to contact your wife." And this is like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
And, I'm excited. I'm excited about this. Because I had a bad heart from birth. So
sure,
I'm like, whoa, yeah, yay. And so I called my wife, and unfortunately I freaked her out. She, oh my God, what do I do? And she goes, "I'm going to get the kids and we'll be up there as soon as we can. I'll try to be up there." Because, I'm thinking I'm in the hospital. They say I'm going to have it tomorrow. They're going to roll me down like 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock in the morning for the surgery.
Right.
Of course, they didn't roll me into the surgeon till evening, but she gathered the kids, she packed things up, and because that was supposed to be the day I was supposed to get out of the hospital, because they'd put me in for 10 days. And then I guess because of insurance reasons, they'd have to let me go for like 5 days, and then they could readmit me. So it was going to be the last day that I was in the hospital. And I got that call, and I was all excited, and she was just all freaked out. So were you freaked out when you finally heard the words, "Today's the day we have the heart"?
Yeah, so that's a really good story. So Terri's, I think she got the word maybe about 4:30 or 5 o'clock in the morning, when the doctor came in and said, "We have a heart." And you got to know that Terri was listed on November 1st, And this was on November 4th. And of course, we were under the expectation that it would likely be, 14 days to 3 weeks before we would get a heart. So it happened pretty quickly. And I had spent, she'd had the surgery to implant the impella, and I had spent quite a few days there at the hospital. We live about an hour away from the hospital. But I had come home the night before. It was a Thursday night. I'd come home that night just to take care of the dog and spend some time at home and, do the laundry or whatever it is I needed to do. And, I wasn't sleeping well. In fact, me and the dog pretty much just slept on the couch because I didn't want to be in the bedroom alone. But the phone rang about 6 o'clock and it was Terri, and she was emotional and tearful. And she said, "We have a heart." And I was like, "Oh, wow, that quick." And it kind of hit me the same thing. But, the first emotion was, thank God. And the second emotion was, are you okay? And then I think the third one was, okay, what do we do? And so the practical things, I called my daughter, can you come? Here's what's going on. She lived in Indiana, so she was relatively close. I'm going to leave the dog here. I'll make arrangements at the kennel so you can bring him after you get here, but I got to go now. Called my son. He lives in Colorado. Of course, he was planning to come when the transplant happened, but, wasn't there before. So I said, hey, it looks like it's a go. You got to get ready and all of that. And then I took off and I went to Cincinnati and went in there and just sat there with Terri. And, we went through the same kind of a thing where it looked like it was going to be in a few hours and then maybe in the middle of the night and then, well, maybe the next morning. There were those delays. And, I remember specifically, one of the social workers or the pastoral group coming in and saying, we got another delay. And Terri was like, it's okay. The donor and the donor family are going through a whole lot worse. We're fine. We're just going to sit here and wait. And so that's kind of what we did. That sort of day and a half from the time we got the notice to the time they rolled her in the operating room at 7 p.m. on a Saturday night. And at about 4:30 in the morning, the surgeon came in with the entire team. And because, again, remember, she was the first one. And so there were a lot of people there. And they had a gallery full of people watching the surgery, the whole transplant team, all the coordinators, everybody. And I don't know that they do that for every surgery, but again, it was kind of historical. So I got a lot of updates through the night. The heart is here. We're starting to implant. The heart's implanted. It's beating. So I had been kind of kept up to speed in little bits and pieces the whole time. So, that emotion was a little easier to control than if I had been sitting there not knowing what was going on. But anyway, I got a little bit past your question and on into the surgery emotions. But again, it just all went so well, and we were so fortunate that things went the way that they did. And again, Terri's strength is kind of what I always say is what helped carry me through and keep me on an even keel. And then later on, after, no sleep for about 3 days and all of that, quick funny story. So after all of that, after getting there, on Friday and then waiting until Sunday morning and then seeing Terri after the surgery for the first time, I had to leave to go to the airport to pick up my son because he was coming in from Colorado. And I had to run down to pick him up. And I left that morning. It might have been 10 or 10:30 in the morning. And I started down, and it's a little bit of an unfamiliar part of town. And, my head's spinning with emotions and all their other things. And I'm in the car, and the coordinator called me, or the director of the program called me, and how are you doing? I'm going home now. Things were beautiful. And she was telling me all this. And I'm driving, and I shouldn't have been. And I'm really distracted and tired and everything else. And I blow through a red light. And I'm going, oh, crap. And I look over, and to the left, there's a cop, there's a policeman. And he pulls me over, and he goes, do you know what you did? I said, yeah. And I said, I know. I'm sorry. I said, my wife just had a heart transplant at Christ Hospital. And he looked at me, and he said, they don't do heart transplants there. I said, well, they do now. And he kind of could see that I was upset and, and I was being sincere. And he said, okay, well, do you know where you're going? I said, yeah, down to and he goes, okay, slow down. Go get your son. It's okay. But I mean, and just yesterday we drove through that same intersection, and I told her, I said, oh, there's where I blow through the intersection. but after all that time, those emotions were pretty raw. But the cop was kind of like, well, that's a new excuse. I've never heard that one before.
I might have to remember that next time. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Well, they bought it, and it was actually true. I mean, I could have verified it, but anyway.
So what would you like for the audience to know the most?
Well, first of all, and first and foremost, I really want to say that the transplant community is a unique and wonderful community. We have run into so many people that are touched by transplantation and organ donation that have just really touched our hearts, and we're so grateful to be part of the community. Somebody asked me once, what you were most grateful for about the experience, and my answer is really the experience itself, because quite frankly, it's given Terri and I direction for the rest of our lives, and a passion that we can pursue, and things that we can do that help us to feel like we're making contributions to the community, and that's become so important to us. When I retired and we had plans to travel and do all those things, that was going to be our life after the transplant or after retirement. But that changed, and that's okay, because we consider it to be a blessing. So if you're in the community or just entering the community, don't be afraid. It can be transformative in a good way if you allow it to be. And a lot of that has to do with your attitude and how you approach it. In terms of caregiving, it's certainly just become, as I think back on it, probably something that was part of my DNA from the beginning. I was always the one the kids wanted to come to when they were sick. I've taken care of Terri through hers. I took care of both my parents before they passed. I really hadn't thought of it before, but it's a role that's very honorable and very worthwhile. And so for those that are out there experiencing that or about to experience it, I would say, again, embrace it. It's not easy, like a lot of roles in life aren't, but it can be very joyful. And seek help and seek support. Join a support community, whether it's mine or another one that you find out there, but have a community that can help you. I think that is probably the key to being able to, successfully navigate these very choppy waters. And so that's what I would like to say to the people in the community. Thank you for all that you do. So many of them become advocates for organ, eye, and tissue donation. And to the caregivers, keep on carrying on, because your patient and your loved one really needs it, and you need support. So come join us.
Again, give all that information, how they can contact you and your group. So, if their interest is
Absolutely.
They're going, this sounds like what I've been looking for, months or years.
Right.
Let them know how to find you.
Okay, absolutely. So the best, easiest way is to go to TCH Caregivers Heart.com, TCH Caregivers Heart.com. You can find registration information and information about us there. You can also send me an email at george@tchcaregiversheart.com, and I will certainly respond and send you any information that might be available. And again, appreciate everybody's interest and appreciate the opportunity with you today to have this chance. And again, on the website, I would encourage people to register for the group, because the online group sessions are extremely important. But don't forget, there's also a private Facebook group that you can join, where if you feel the need to be a little more anonymous and you need to vent in between our twice-a-month sessions, you're welcome to do that too. So I encourage everybody to do both. And again, you can do that from the website.
Anything I may have missed or anything that you want to get out before we let you go today?
No, I don't think so. Again, I just want to express my thanks to you for having me on today and for giving me the platform to talk a little bit about our experience and about this TCH Caregivers Heart community that we're building. And I encourage anybody out there that hears this, that thinks that this might be something they'd be interested in, stop by, check us out. You're completely in control as to how much you engage. But at the minimum, I would recommend that you engage just by getting online and listening and hearing the other people. I think once you do, it sort of becomes contagious. We see a lot of people that get on and are kind of shy at first and bashful, but once they kind of see that it's a safe and comfortable spot, they'll jump in and contribute, and that's the beauty of it. Everybody contributing.
Thank you so much, George, for sharing information about this exciting new caregivers group. TCH Caregivers Heart.com. Please join us again next week for a new heartfelt episode of Gift of Life, the Organ Transplant Podcast. And if you have a transplant story, we would love to hear from you and get it out to the people. Just email us, giftoflifepodcast@gmail.com. Follow us on Facebook, Gift of Life, the Organ Transplant Podcast. And we have a brand new website, giftoflifepodcast.com. Not a whole lot there yet, but check us out. Also, don't forget to like and share this episode with family and friends. And we do appreciate that 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. Another podcast you might enjoy is myself and my former morning radio partner, Bill Stevens. BJ and Bill, the podcast. We also want to send out a big thank you to the Podcast Playground Network for making this podcast possible. Until next time, I'm BJ Odom. Thank you so much for being a part of our journey and reminding us all to appreciate each and every day and to treasure the extraordinary gift of life.
He was running on empty, heart fading fast. Doctor said, man, you ain't gonna last. But a stranger's kindness, a gift so true, turned the night sky into something new. He got a second chance, he got a brand new spark. Like a freight train rolling back from the dark. Gift of life, let the story be told. One heart beats, another takes hold. Give a little, save a soul. Ain't no greater rock and roll. "15 years later, the road got rough. The fight ain't over when the climb is tough. Needed a kidney, the race was on. Another hero stepped up, kept him strong. Every breath he takes is a tale of hope. One life saved, another can cope. Gift of life, let the story be told. One heart beats, another takes hold. Give a little, save a soul. Ain't no greater rock and roll. Doctor's hands, a donor's grace, running on down to a brand new place. Second chances don't come twice, but when they do, man, they feel so nice. So let's spread the word, let the people know. One yesterday lets a miracle grow. You don't need wings just to save a man, just a little love, a helping hand. Gift of life, let the story be told. One heart beats, another takes hold. Give a little, save a soul. Ain't no greater rock and roll. BJ still rocking, still standing tall, thanks to the ones who gave it all. Gift of life, hear the sound. Pass it on, pass it down. The Gift of Life podcast, hosted by BJ Odom. Listen now.